Welcome to episode 11 of Synergy to Synastry. Quick notes at the top. If you'd like to book a reading with either myself or Christine, check out the links in our show notes. Also, if you want to get a reading for free, remember that you can enter the raffle we announced back in episode 5, Clearly You're Intuitive. A refresher on the rules: you track the movie references that Christine and I plant in each regular episode of the podcast. This started in episode 2 and will continue through the end of the season. And what you do is write them down, and then after the season concludes, send them to synergytosynastry@gmail.com by December 31st, 2024. If you get all 15 Anchorman references, you'll win a free reading with Christine. All 15 Twilight references, just the first movie, not the entire saga, you'll earn a reading with me. And if you submit all 30 references, you'll receive 2 readings, one with each of us. If you'd like to enter to win a reading for yourself or a loved one but haven't been tracking, no time like the present, you can always go back and re-listen. On to the topic of the day, we're going to be discussing divination tools, what we use, how we use them, and why. Christine, why don't you begin the conversation with a definition?
A divination tool is a tool used to channel energy, receive messages, and connect to guides, source, or your own intuition. I think most people think of a divination tool as a crystal ball, but it doesn't have to be. Some common tools that are used are cards, runes, a pendulum, astrology, numerology, etc. Some of the more peripheral divination tools would be scrying, water gazing, tea leaves. So, scrying is when you are looking into either a mirror or water and seeing images. Tea leaves, it's the same thing. If you've ever seen somebody drink a cup of tea, once they finish it, they'll turn the cup over and look at the image that they see inside at the bottom of the cup, and the tea leaf reader will interpret messages. I'm feeling called to point out that a Ouija board is not a divination tool you should be using. Ouija boards, they don't have boundaries, tend to pick up low vibrational entities. And if you ever have a reading with me, there's one line I say in my intention, which is if there's any low vibrational energy, please leave now. Do not use a Ouija board as a divination tool. And that's the PSA for this episode. We're going to jump into why Renee and I use divination tools in our practice.
Ultimately, how I got into using any sort of divination tool was a direct result of exploration when I became aware that I had psychic gifts. If you look online, how do I develop it? Oftentimes, what comes up are divination tools. So, one of the first things I did was I bought an oracle deck. The second one after that was I got crystals. I had already been journaling. I've been doing my dream journals, but the nature of what I was journaling about and how I was using it evolved within the first year or so. This past year in 2023, I got a tarot deck.
I use divination tools almost to check my work and help me get out of my own head. We call it getting neutral. And when it's hard, I use tools. It's really hard for me to separate my anxiety from my intuition. But thinking back to when I first started using divination tools, I would ask questions and I would write down what the answers were, or I would ask for a sign and write down what that sign is, not knowing at the time I was doing channeled journaling. The second tool that I started using, I went to a class with a medium. She taught a class on how to use a pendulum to ask yes, no, maybe questions. I just used one in a reading yesterday. I knew what I was seeing was that what she was fearing wasn't going to come true, but I used the pendulum as a way to sort of double check my work and double check it in front of her. I also use tarot cards and crystals, and we'll get into the details on all of these in a little bit.
I want to underscore what you said earlier about leveraging the divination tools to help read yourself. When you're trying to read someone psychically, you're clearing your energy, you're connecting with the other person. But if you're trying to read into yourself, you have a bias because you want it. So you're hoping for a positive outcome. You're hoping you get the job. You're hoping it works out with that person that you've just started talking to. And because of that, it clouds your judgment. And it's very, very challenging to actually read into yourself. You can do it, but it's a skill to be developed over time, and you have to know what your limits are. Turning to a divination tool is helpful. You're channeling that intention of wanting to answer that question through the cards. And let's say you make a spread or you do a single card pull or whatever it is, you're intuitively guided which card to pick. So you can leverage your intuition up until that point, but not all the way to the answer. So that way you don't feel like you're swaying or influencing anything. Then you can pull the card and it, in a way, will feel more objective.
Such a great point, Renee. And speaking of using divination tools to read yourself, let's get started talking about what we actually use today. We both use tarot cards, but I know you use oracle cards specifically. Tell us about those because I don't use them regularly.
When I first was researching these decks, I had to look up the difference between Oracle and Tarot. The explanation that I had read was that you can view Oracle cards as books. They are general themes, versus for Tarot, you're going to have chapters. They get a little bit more granular and specific. So you can use in a reading Oracle and Tarot together. Going into Oracle as a beginner felt much more accessible to me. Every single deck is going to be different. So the one that I have been using is a 44 card deck, and it's called the Moon deck. There's affirmations on each of the cards. I liked that the messaging was really, really positive, schedule permitting. Each morning, I will shuffle the deck. I'm getting little signals of how many times should I be shuffling? How am I going to pull the card or cards from the deck? And then the methodology for that selection. And then what I always do is I always double check. Do I have the right cards? So sometimes I'll go to pull a card. I'm like, oh, this one? And then I get a no and I put it back and I try again. Okay, that feels good. All right, it's these 3 cards. Once I've locked in with the cards, then I flip them over. If I'm doing a reading for somebody, I'll just have the knowing or I ask the question, should I bring my cards to this reading? I'll also know if I should be drawing a card before talking to them, drawing a card during our conversation. And it's almost like you're getting their energy in the deck. And then I can just be having a conversation with them about something completely random. And I know, same thing, when to stop, how many cards to pull, if I should sort them into piles. That tends to happen during my readings. I lay all the cards out and I know, okay, these 2 cards go together and therefore the third topic that we're going to be discussing. And then as we go into the reading, I know when I should be flipping each of the cards over. And sometimes it's before we get into the topic, or it's during the discussion, or it's when the conversation is basically wrapped up and it's just to add any additional color. I go off of all of those little tiny cues which you hone from working with it a lot. The recommendation that I've always seen is start with using it on yourself because you want to have an understanding of what you're pulling, what's in there, what the messages might be when you pull them for yourself versus for somebody else. A couple little year to date stats for 2024 because I pull these cards every single day. The top 2 cards that I have right now are the mystery card and the clarity card. So the mystery card is about trusting the mystery of life. And for clarity, it's seeking inspired action and trusting your vision. And those do feel pretty spot on when I look back at them retrospectively about how this year has been transpiring, that looking for what's inspiring me, try to take that action to go forward. And I feel like I'm swimming in mystery of what's coming next and how do I stop caring about that and just try to live my life.
I love how you talk about oracle cards. And for those of you just getting started, I would recommend starting with oracle cards because they're so straightforward. Why I didn't start with oracle cards is beyond me. I went right into tarot, which maybe I just like to make things harder on myself. From there, let's chat about tarot cards because it's the next card that we both use. I will pull a card for the year and then a card for every month throughout the year. I love to go back throughout the year and look and kind of see how things have transformed. One of the ways I've used to educate myself about tarot, aside from taking a class, is the Oracle of LA has a podcast, and we'll link it in the show notes. You can learn the mythology of the stories behind each card. You can learn the history, how the decks have evolved. I use the Mystic Mondays deck, and it's a more modern deck. I was very drawn to it, like Renee was drawn to her Oracle cards. I was under the impression that your first deck of tarot cards should be gifted to you, but I didn't have anyone in my life who was going to gift me tarot cards. So I had this on my mind when I was in the gift shop and I saw this deck and I was like, has to be it. There was only one deck there. It was looking at me. I was looking at it. And from then on, that was the start of my use for tarot cards.
This is actually the first year that I've pulled a card for the calendar year overall and each of the months. I did this for both Oracle and Tarot and integrated them into my planner in order to see them as 2024 progresses and flip backwards to remind myself of the story arc. And then, of course, by the end of the month, I look back at it and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that was so aligned, which is what's crazy. The deck that I have is an 82 card deck, and it's called, wait for it, the Moonchild deck. Had to get another one moon related. I love the imagery on this one. It's actually a little like Egyptian inspired too. I wasn't doing anything related to tarot. I then listened to a podcast, and as a sidebar, the person that was being interviewed happened to have a business where they sold tarot decks. I took to Google, I did a quick search, and I just said out to the universe, I got it. I'll buy the cards when I get home. Ordered them within probably a couple weeks of getting back, and then the dream stopped. And I did do a little workshop within a month or so after getting the cards, which was great. And one of the things that she had talked about was take that pressure off. Remember that you are intuitive. Read into the card with it face down. Try to get meaning from it and then flip the card over. And that's one way of using it as a divination tool to still enhance your psychic messages that you're getting, but also read into what you're seeing and grab messages from the front of the card. So there are other ways that you can do it that are a little bit more palatable. And that was some of my introduction, which made me feel a little bit better so I don't have to sit there trying to memorize 70 something cards.
Renee and I also keep talking about how we use our divination tools to help us plan. And one of the planners that I use, we'll put a link to it as well. It's called the Ritual Planner, Writual. And they have tarot and astrology tarot combined journals that you can use throughout the year. And, it comes with stickers. So you pull a card, you put a sticker in the box. So you're pulling the card, you're reading about it, you're intuiting about it, however you want to use it, and then you're writing stuff down in your journal. And it's all kind of mapped out for you.
Speaking of planners, let's transition to talk about journaling. I first got into journaling because my sister got me this self care box, like those subscription boxes where there's a bunch of random items in it. And there was a journal. I ended up buying the rest of the set so I could do the entire calendar year. Approximately since COVID, I've started doing my own journals. So I'm on journal number 4 right now. Mostly do channel journaling in is the same one that I actually use to take notes on the Nuurvana course. So it's like this whole psychic notebook of, if I do any sort of mentorships or workshops, I put all of that in there. And ultimately, I started this practice for the same reason as I had initially got the Oracle deck, because it was a very basic way that you could tap in and connect with your guides. The more that you practice it, you can kind of feel like a lightness or expansion. I tend to feel it up more in my head. Most often, I will do channel journaling after or maybe during listening to some sort of binaural beat. Maybe it's a guided meditation, maybe it's just music, and then I'll start journaling. I generate some topics and or a list of questions. Sometimes it's a free write. More often than not these days, I have some sort of intention. I did channel journaling the other day and I got a whole list of instructions. And I was drawn to this book that I have on my bookshelf behind me. And I was like, okay, whatever. So I finished, I wrote all this stuff down, and then I'm starting to work my way through the list. I finally get to that book. I'm like, all right, I'm curious, what on earth is on page 68? I open it up, and this is the Hugo book. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's essentially the Danish people are historically very happy. And this book is about the Danish lifestyle and things that make you feel like hygge. But I digress. I open the book up to page 68 and it's a recipe. And I was thinking, is this something we'd even eat? I guess we could eat this. I put the book down. Not 10 minutes later, my sister walks in. Do you want to go food shopping with me? I was thinking maybe we can make some new recipes. Is there anything that you want to make? And I just did a double take and I said, well, I kind of was guided to open this book and I do have this recipe. And so I read it to her and we bought ingredients for it and I just made it for dinner last night. And it was good.
Yeah, I love that. So I do journaling as well. I'll ask questions or is there anything I need to know, and just whatever comes into my head I will write. I started doing this, I want to say maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, not realizing that that was channeled journaling. Recently I was going through a bunch of my journals, and I was going through one of them, and everything that I had asked a question about and gotten an answer for back then came true. Yeah, it's real. And I feel like that's an even simpler way for anyone listening to get started. You don't need a deck, you don't need anything. I know we both use journals for dreams as well, so let's discuss that more. Renee, why don't you explain how your dream journal works, and then I'll share about mine.
I started to train myself to write down my dreams immediately after waking up back in January of 2020. I'll use my phone even though in the middle of the night you'll get blasted with light because I can't write fast enough with the pen and paper. An alternative is using dictation and later on screening for typos. I typically fill out my journal at the end of the day, so that's when I'll transcribe all of the dreams I wrote down on my phone. Because what might happen is I might have a dream and I wake up and go, whoa, okay, I got a message from that. I might act on it, I might share it. Other times you just kind of forget or it doesn't feel meaningful, but maybe 4 days later, when I'm reading it to review for my week, it all of a sudden makes more sense. And then, same thing at the end of the month, I am going to read through the entire list, but at least I was tallying everything week over week. So that just divides up the time a little bit more and makes it less exhausting.
I remember I got a dream journal, like a specific dream journal. Every morning I would wake up and write down my dreams, and I noticed that my dreams, whatever was in them, was way more than the allotted space in the journal. So I would focus on how I was feeling, any key people, any key words. So I've started doing dictation in my notes app, and then, I'll go back and clean it up. I don't do a review of my dreams necessarily. I feel like if something stood out to me, it's usually somewhere in the back of my head, and something will trigger it when I need it to be triggered.
Creating a dream log practice is probably one of the most beginner tools for tapping into your intuition, especially if you don't believe you're psychic and your internal dialogue is likely interfering with experimenting. Even if you only dream once per month, then great, you can look back at the end of the year and realize something from your January dream played out in September.
If you dream more often and you want to review, maybe try every 3 months, 6 months, or like me, check sporadically.
It's a great verification process for budding psychic abilities, and who knows, maybe if you start paying more attention, you'll begin dreaming more frequently and start getting messages.
The next divination tool we want to discuss is crystals, which both of us use. Crystals are basically really pretty rocks in the ground that hold a vibration. And when you go to a crystal shop or when you look up a crystal online, you can see what that crystal is typically used for. So I'll just give a quick rundown of the main ones that I use. I use amethyst because it tends to enhance your psychic abilities. When I'm feeling insecure about my gifts, I'll hold on to that. I'll also use clear quartz for clarity, black tourmaline for grounding, selenite to cleanse, and labradorite is my new favorite to enhance my aura. I'll just go over to my little collection and see what I feel drawn to. I was doing a reading for someone and picked up this red jasper crystal I was drawn to prior, and she said it's the same one she uses most often for herself.
Don't you love when that happens?
Totally.
In my 2020 mediumship reading, he advised me to go to a crystal shop nearby and get something to help ground out my stress and support developing my intuition. I found a shop nearby and was able to order a set online intuitively selected for you, which I love the sound of. And I received clear quartz, selenite, amethyst, rose quartz, and smoky quartz. And I unboxed them with my mom. Picking up the clear quartz, like I felt my hand tingling. I felt like a temperature change. And that's something that you will commonly hear is similar to the oracle decks, but honestly, I think even especially with crystals, you can feel really drawn to them. So what happened for me was a couple months back, I was doing a reading at a crystal shop. I mentioned that in our signs episode. My first time in there was when I met the owner, and I was walking around after the conversation, and I was just drawn to this table. I knew I had to go to this table. I knew I had to go to this side of the table. I looked down, and it was a peach moonstone. Of course, it's a moon. I picked it up and I held it in my hand, and I had the same kind of feeling. You're my life now. And I went and I read the description and I started laughing because it was completely spot on with where I was in life. Crystals can correspond to different chakras, and they also can have certain meanings. You could sit with it, you're trying to channel into that intention. This is what it's representing, this is what it's trying to do. I'll have some on the windowsill, some on my desk, some next to my bed, some on a bookshelf. And what will happen is I'll just be walking around one day and it's like ping. And I just go to each of them and I know exactly where to put them and which ones to put away. I'm clearly picking up on something because I'm having physical reactions to holding some of them. I'm knowing what I should put where in the room, almost like playing off of like the feng shui, because there's different areas in your room that represent different aspects of your life, plus how you actually have your room configured.
You're leaning on your intuition. And I think the crystals are charged with an energy that's stronger than other items. I love that you have crystals all over your place because I've tried to do that, but my two cats seem to think the crystals are theirs and try to steal them.
All right, why don't we talk about the last divination tool, which is one that I don't use, but Christine, you mentioned earlier, the pendulum.
A pendulum is, an object at the bottom of a string. And what I like to do is I hold out my left hand and I hang the pendulum over it, and I'll ask yes no questions for whatever I need. I always start with a basic question like, if today's Thursday, I'll say, is today Thursday? And see which way it goes. You can say to the pendulum, show me my yes, show me my no, show me my maybe. And what it does is it'll move in different directions to show you what a yes, no, and a maybe look like. So for me, yes goes north and south, a no goes east and west, and a maybe spins in a circle.
When you're using the pendulum, do you get the sense that there's a spirit present guiding it?
I will call in angels or my spirit guides before using it.
To close out our conversation about divination tools, we wanted to clarify these tools are a supplement to intuition. So it's important not to over rely on them, especially when you are trying to develop. I think we can both agree doing something like journaling, that's okay. You want to be mindful of always trying to return to, are you feeling open? Are you feeling constricted? Are you feeling any sensations anywhere? And you can always use journaling at any given point just to document. And it can be a good method for honing. What's the difference between I'm writing down a to do list, I'm actually getting messages? And if you remember, I've explained this in previous episodes. The biggest thing that happens for me is I write it down and I tend to react to it. That's the signal for you that something else is going on. And don't try all of these at once. Time for what we've learned this week.
I am very excited. Yes, I have one food related thing that I've learned this week, but I'm going to start off with a word that I learned. I'm reading this book called Bella Figura by Kameen Mohammadi. Basically, it's about this woman who she's living in London and she gets laid off from her corporate job. She's breaking out in acne. She's gaining weight from the stress of the job. And her friend's like, why don't you come stay at my apartment in Florence, Italy? and, decompress, write that book that you want to write. While reading the book, I learned the word brillare, which means to sparkle. And I feel like I just love sparkling in general. I feel like I use it a lot as an emoji. So to finally learn the word in Italian was very exciting. Brillare. And the second thing that I learned that I'm a little concerned about is my cousin and I went to the Starbucks Reserve Roastery here in New York this weekend because we wanted espresso martinis. Our bartender was showing us the different ways that people make espresso martinis. So, first we got the traditional vodka, then he talked us into putting tequila in, and then for the final one, not only was there milk in my martini, he grated fresh cheese on top of my martini. And I still don't know how I feel about it. I'm glad I tried it, but I would never do it again. It's like drinking pasta and coffee at the same time. And also, I don't like milk. So if you ask me, milk was a bad choice for this drink.
When I was brainstorming about what I learned this week, I was thinking anything but food, anything but food. What I learned this week, throwback to episode 7 on yoga, I learned the difference between cow face and shoelace poses. My sister and I were doing a yoga practice, and the instructor told us to get into shoelace pose. This isn't shoelace. I was appalled. I was like, she's wrong. And I did subsequent research afterwards to confirm because I was convinced she had the name wrong. So, in both cow face and shoelace poses, you're sitting on the ground and you stack your knees in a way that your legs are crossed. So your feet are pointed in opposite directions. So your right foot is pointed to your left. In cow face pose, you put your arms or hands, depending on your flexibility, in a bind between your shoulder blades. In shoelace, you do eagle arms. And eagle arms are when you stack your arms in front of you. As an example, your right elbow tucks into the inside of your left elbow, so on your left bicep. And then you twist your hands around each other. It's a different version of a very deep shoulder stretch. And in this variation, you're doing the legs, which are the same as cow face. You had eagle arms, and she had you bend forward. So you're folding forward and you put your forearms on the ground. And let me tell you, this was no joke. This was a really deep pose. We only held it for a minute. And I said to my sister afterwards, if we held that for 3 minutes, we would have felt like new people. I still felt really good after doing it. It was painful, like it was really hard. But yes, so this week I learned the difference between cow face and shoelace poses.
When I was in yin yoga yesterday, the teacher told us to get into corpse pose, and I knew it was Shavasana from our podcast. So exciting.
For this episode, we actually used some of our divination tools that we mentioned during our discussion. My deck has affirmations written on each card, so those will be the mantras for my reading, but I will go through them as we get there. I got the image of Velcro, then I got the term separation anxiety. Very quickly after that, I was seeing a snowman, but the idea wasn't about Frosty the Snowman as an example. It was the stacking of elements, and the elements meaning ideas. All of a sudden, it just shot up into the height of a skyscraper. Then I was nudged to flip over the first card, which is the focus card. The mantra on this card reads, I focus on what is working. In this situation, with Velcro, with the stacking of the snow, you're being asked to recognize that connection for you is happening, or if it's past tense, that it's happened for you before, and holding on to that idea and releasing the fear of separation. And when I say separation, what I was getting was loss and death, and that can be of ideas or of people, however that presents for you. I then was moved on to my second card, which is the adapt card. The mantra is, my instincts keep me adaptable in the face of any obstacle. So, the additional message that I got from this card was remember to trust yourself through the process of loss and change because, quote, you know the way and the right path is unfolding in front of you. Just look around the snow pile. Tell us about your reading.
I don't even know where to begin. My reading screen was like basically like turning on the television. There was a little like static before the TV actually turned on. And then I was getting like Saved by the Bell themes, Saturday morning cartoons, and it felt like nostalgia for an easier, simpler time, wanting to feel that way again. If you're worried about giving people at work some of your responsibilities because you think they're going to fail, give them the opportunity to fail, see what happens. It feels like your brain is trying to think 10 steps ahead, but in every single scenario. And that is so exhausting. The goal here is to calm that part of your brain down. Start enjoying your free time your way. When you come to the end of your life, you're not going to be like, oh, I should have worked more. I used my pendulum to pick a tarot card for you guys, and I got the Nine of Swords reversed. One thing to note is that every suit in tarot relates to a different element, and swords relate to your mind, upright. It tends to reflect feelings of like anxiety, worry, distress, but when it's reversed, there's a mindfulness about the thought patterns that you're having. So you're aware of how you're basically driving yourself up a wall. You want a certain outcome. Big emotions are going to come up. Anxiety is just a part of life. But with this card, we know that you have the tools to deal with them. Thanks for listening.
If you'd like to learn more, the resources we used to prepare for this episode are listed in the show notes.
You can reach me, Christine, at Channeled by Christine with one L on Instagram.
And you can reach me, Renee, at _read by Renee, or connect with both of us via email at synergytosynastry@gmail.com. Keep your spirit curious and your aura sparkling.
We'll see you when the stars next align.
Just when I thought my end was quiet.
It makes me happy when I hear noise coming from your end because I feel like my end is always the problem. So when it happens with you, I'm like, ah, they're human too.
We have a dog next door that's on the other side of my wall over here that they got around a year ago. It would legit cry through the wall the entire day. And we were realizing it was happening during working hours. So probably when they were leaving.
No.
We don't know them. So it's not like we're going to knock on their door and be like, hey, by the way, your dog's a terror.
It's always the tiny ones. I had one yapper during the pandemic that like I don't know what floor it was on because it wasn't mine, and it was just all day. And I love dogs, but I did not like that one.